in the pursuit of truth and common sense in an unbelievable world. You're listening to the Right Mind Podcast with your host, Todd Schowalter.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Right Mind. I'm Todd Schowalter. Today, my guest is Steve Joyner. He's a publicist out of Los Angeles, and we've known each other for a while. We've actually just finished doing, we were in the progress of doing work together, and he's got a lot of stories. How you doing, Steve?
Good. How you doing, Todd?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you. I tell you what, I mean, we've worked together now for a few months, and it's the people that you know, I mean, they vary. I mean, you've got actors, you've got authors, you've got hypnotists. I mean, they're all across the board. I mean, how did you, what is your background? How did you get involved with this? And how did you meet all these people?
Okay. Funny story about that. It goes back to before I was born, actually. My mom, Marianne, she went to a girls' college preparatory school called Arcadia, and it was in Anoka. Excuse me, it was Anoka in Arcadia, California. It's been a long day. Excuse me. Anyway,
Sure.
And she went to school with Cecil B. DeMille's granddaughter, Diane DeMille. That was her roommate. And she knew Ernie Kovac's daughter, Troy Donahue's sister, and so on.
Wow.
So as a child, I was very much a movie nerd, if you will. I was watching old movies by the time I was 5. And I just always loved watching great films. And I wanted to get into acting really bad. So my mom had enrolled me in a place called Multimedia Arts, and I had an acting coach named Drew Scott, and that was in La Mesa, California. Mm-hmm. And I appeared in a commercial, I remember, and then I did a couple films and so on. And then it was a lot of it through the Extras Guild, a lot of extra work, basically, a couple lines here and there. And so there's an interesting time capsule of me out there from that time. And then I didn't stick with it because I had met someone who's no longer with us, who passed away, who was a child actor, and she was a very depressed person, she was. And I don't know, it just didn't seem appealing. So I went and tried to live a normal life. And at the time, my parents, they were going through their issues. So anyway, I went back to being normal, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And in my sophomore year of high school, I joined the theater department because it's where all the pretty girls were. Sure. And then I started doing plays. I was in Death of a Salesman, Arsenic and Old Lace. I love doing that play. I did a lot of stuff. Okay. And then in my 20s, I went and started doing things at bigger venues, La Jolla Playhouse, Spreckles Theater. This was in San Diego. Well, fast forward to the mid 2000s. No, it was later. It was 2000. I can't remember the year. Anyway, I had booked a couple of actors at an autograph show, kind of like a Comic-Con type thing. And I had a Facebook friend out of Boston who did a show, not as good as yours, but it was like a show like what you do. And anyway, he asked me, he said, I didn't know you knew so-and-so was the person I was in the picture with. He said, I'd like to interview him. I said, well, what the hell for? He said, well, it's a podcast. And I said, well, what's a podcast? He said, well, it's like a radio show. And he sent me a link to it, and I checked it out. And yeah, the format was different than this, but it was, it looked interesting. So I set it up, and then I didn't hear from the guy for 2 weeks. Besides, thank you, I didn't hear nothing. And then he said he wanted to interview everybody I had ever met. And I said, well, it's quite a, request right there. I don't think I can do that. And then I had talked to a man who's like my mentor. And he said, well, Steve, you have met a lot of great people. He says, they all have stories to tell. He said, why don't you get involved in this podcasting? So I had ran ads, and now I work with a little over 300 podcasts. You're one of them. Mm-hmm. And sure. Different guests to different shows. And I have an assistant, Aaron. He helps me. He's over in Oklahoma. He helps me with booking and running the day-to-day everything. Which is kind of a calamity sometimes, Sure. Aaron's great, but and then I realized that you said kind of the weird hodgepodge of people, Todd, because you've interviewed them, psychics like
That's what I was saying. You have so many. I mean, they're varied. I mean, Yeah, and they're all interesting. So I guess that's my day. I mean, I could see. I mean, so you ran ads, and what was the time frame of this? I mean, as far as putting this all together, I mean, it's just over the course of the last couple of years.
6 years roughly.
Well, and what I enjoy talking, especially to these guests, that's been interesting is a lot of the listeners and the viewers. I mean, they may know them from like Larry Hankin. They know him from Seinfeld, and they know him, from Friends and things like that. But I was interested to know that Larry studied to be an industrial designer, and he's got all this background from like Ivy League schools and stuff. So I mean, it's neat to have these people on the show and learn about the other things that most people just don't know about. Now, as far as like, what you're doing right now, I mean, are you going to stick to entertainment, or are you looking to broaden your sphere as far as the type of guests you work with?
I want to broaden the sphere. There are a lot of people who need to have their story out there. I mean, primarily it's entertainment people, yes, but I'd like to work with people who were doing other things besides that. I mean, I like working with authors. I have a couple of them, like I said, Christine and Nelson. I know I'm hooking you up with them, but it varies. I mean, and I've actually put you on shows to be interviewed by folks.
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to stick with what I know best, but I am going to also kind of venture out a little bit too.
Okay, so what do you look for in a guest? I mean, if somebody approaches you, I mean, is there certain types of, if some guy just off the street says, "Hey, I want to be booked on shows," I'm assuming, you've got some type of vetting that you do. What do you look for when you're, trying to take on guests and podcasters too, for that matter?
Well, I don't interview people. You do,
right.
Okay, so if it's somebody, me and Aaron will talk to them, or I'll talk to them and see what they're all about. If they're, if they're doing it for the right intentions and not the wrong ones, fine. I won't work with like really super evangelical people or politicians. I won't work with those people. And I don't want to push anybody. I don't want to help someone win an election or do that. So that's not my thing. I look at where they're from, and also, can I put them on a show like yours, and can it be entertaining and informative and so on,
Okay.
And then with the show host, like your show, you do a lot of pre-prep. I mean, I've seen all the pre-prep. People think that what you do, I'm sure, is, it's easy. He's just there in the studio. No, it's not that easy, because it's tough. And now with some people, who are obscure and don't have a lot going on, I'm sure you as an interviewer have to think, okay, what do I ask that person? And then when you get someone like Hank, and you mentioned Larry, he's done so much. How do you condense that into a half hour? I mean,
right.
Got to career the last decades. But what's interesting is, so it's quite the process. There's a little over 300 shows that I work with, and if this makes sense, I had to go through about 400 to get to that. I mean, I won't work with the Howard Stern guys, and that are being ridiculous. I mean, and I don't work with like professional wrestling stuff anymore. I knew some wrestlers, it's not my thing. Like I said, I try to see what fits and what I click with, and see shows grow. And I like to take show hosts like yourself, who do this all the time, and book you to appear on shows for people to ask you your backstory and how because I know you've been doing this for a while. And so it's not as easy as people think, putting these things together. You and I have spoken on weekends. I'll do stuff on weekends if I have to, And the cool thing is, a lot of it's taped. I mean, this is what we're doing right now. This is taped, but live radio and live stuff, that's always the tricky stuff. And
sure.
When I started out, the first big show that I produced in New York and Long Island, those guys would do it live, and it was on Meerkat. It was this program called Meerkat, I remember it. And it was weird, because it wouldn't be face to face like us. It would be like they would be sitting at their desks. They had a set, and then you hear a phone ring, and it was the guest calling in on the line, and it was like it was piped into I don't even know how to explain it. It was like it was piped in. So they're talking and you hear the person's voice. You don't see them now.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but now with technology, I mean, you can do this. And during the pandemic, Zoom and Skype and StreamYard and all that became huge. I think it's part of the new normal. I think another great thing about the pandemic is that it's horrible. I mean, I've had the virus. It sucks. But as far as doing what you do, a podcast or interview, show host, I like to call you guys show hosts. It's a good time to be one because people have been sequestered. They've been locked, and there's only so much Tiger King crap you can watch,
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, I mean, one of the things we've talked about without getting too political or anything, the thing that's going with podcasts right now is kind of the last frontier for anything, I mean, I want to say objective, but everything is so slanted right now in the mass media that these smaller podcasts, whether it's mine or somebody that's totally different than me, everybody still is able to have a voice. Rather than just a purchase voice through a major corporation that's going to put out to the mass media. And I think, as you well know, I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, if you're going to have a good show, I mean, it does take a lot of prep and you got to put a lot into it. But a lot of people, I mean, they say, hey, I'm going to start a podcast, and they start a podcast, but I mean, there's stuff that goes into it, and it's kind of like filtering all the riffraff out. I mean, now the stuff that you're doing right now, I mean, you're bringing the whole podcasting field to a much higher level just by bringing some of these higher profile guests to the host, such as myself, that typically wouldn't have access to them. So that said, I mean, what's the next step for you? What I mean, as far as where you're at right now, where would you like to be in, say, a year or 2 years from now?
I'm going to be doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just so you want to grow in the same way, then.
Yeah. And I'll send a guest to a show that I like. I don't care. There are other people who do what I do, and they're wonderful at it. They're better than I am at it, and they'll do a show. I mean, they'll put together interviews, and they'll be like, well. Todd doesn't have enough metrics for so-and-so. I'm not that type of person. I don't care. I don't care if you have 20 loyal listeners and that's it. I mean, what I do care about is you take pride in your show and that you're not, pompous and like, oh, it's, I mean, there are a lot of just the numbers come, but people will be like, well, why would you book so-and-so who's been known, like Larry, why would you book him on a show with 40 listeners? Well, it's because it's 40 people that need to hear him. So, but I'll probably be doing this in a year from now.
Oh, sure. Well, I assume you're going to be doing it. I'm just saying, do you want to take this to a higher level? I mean, do you want to stick with, I mean, even with podcasting, I mean, are you hoping to take, hopefully, shows like mine to a higher, higher level?
Yeah, we're trying to do it. We're trying to see what happens. I mean, I won't turn away many shows if a show is interesting and they're not on there being idiots. Great. I'll send I'll send somebody.
Right.
I do think that I'd like to narrow down the field, to be honest with you, and get a few shows like yourself who really take pride in what they're doing. I mean, your setup is great. The way you look, the whole everything. I
took a shower and everything for you, Steve. I took a shower today.
No, I did too. But I know some guys that would do shows and they look like they fell out of their mother's basement or some shit.
Right.
I mean, the presentation looks bad.
Well, and that's what I was saying. You've got a lot of. I equate it to a lot of people when the Macintosh for the Macs first came out. All of a sudden, everybody is a designer now. Everybody's got a Mac. I'm a designer. So now podcasting. Everybody's got a microphone now. Everybody's a podcaster. And I think eventually that'll even out. Let me digress a little bit, though. I'm going to go back to you were talking the early days and all these people that you grew up with and you're were associated with. You got to have some funny stories. I mean, what were some of the funnier things that happened to you growing up in that kind of environment? Because that's it's obviously it's not your typical environment. So any good stories to share?
I think I know where you're going with this, but like, what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, as far as were you telling me about
about our favorite, everybody's favorite senior citizen, right?
Wilford? Yeah, is it Mr. Brimley, the right, with the diabetic?
He's referring.
Am I allowed to bring this up?
It's fine. It's fine. It's so long ago now, and God rest his soul, But it was a few years ago. I won't say who I was with, but it was a comedian I worked with who was a character actor, and he always played the same nerdy type guy in movies and TV shows. And he was in a movie called 1941. It was Spielberg's first Nolan comedy. And
Belushi was in it. It was Belushi, right? Okay. Coffee break.
We were at a panel, and it was me, this guy, and Tim Matheson and Nancy Allen. I was sitting right next to Nancy Allen all day. That was great. Couldn't ask for anything better than that, And I'm sitting across the table. There's a row, and then across the table is Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk, and Mackenzie Phillips from One Day at a Time. And then it kind of veers off to the left, and there's a row. It's an autograph show.
Okay.
And there's Stephanie Powers from Heart to Heart and Wilford Brimley.
Okay. That's a combo.
Yeah. Well, they didn't care. I mean, it was the way the show was set up. There was no really order thing. And the guy who I'd booked to appear there had a very loud voice that would project, and it was the same voice he would use on in his films and TV shows. He said, "Steve," he's all Steve. He's nudging me. He's all, "Is that the girl from Heart to Heart?" What? He's all, is it? I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's Stephanie Powers." And he says something to the effect of, "Oh, but God, time wasn't good on her. Like, she's old." Basically, he's calling her old,
Okay.
And I'm like, "Oh shit!" Because the next thing I know, Wilford Brimley, he's sitting.
Okay.
He kind of turns and looks at us like that, and he's got the Panama hat on and the glasses. I'm like, "Dude, he heard us." He's like, "Oh no, there's no way. He's like 100 years old." I'm like, "No, he heard us." And about 20 minutes go by, and Wilford Brimley comes walking up, and he just, it's to say it's him,
Right.
And my friend at the time goes to shake his hand, and he wouldn't shake his hand, and I'm like, "Oh, this doesn't look good." And Mackenzie Phillips is staring daggers at my friend, and I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what's going to happen. And Wilford Brimley, he said, I couldn't help but overhear what you gentlemen had to say about the young lady. And my friend just had bad foot. He had bad foot and mouth disease that day. He said, "What do you mean? What young lady?" And anyway, and Brimley crosses his arms, and he's talking to us. Now, I've learned in my life, Todd, that when someone crosses their arms, it's not usually
not a good sign. No, it's not a good sign. Right.
And he's kind of telling us a little bit of like, when I was in the Navy, I did boxing, and I'm like, wait a minute, he's kind of telling us what a badass he was. And then I'm
Wilford Brimley, okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking
things you don't get. Yeah, think about it. Yeah.
You don't usually think of him in a scrap. So I thought, wait a minute, he's telling us, he's defending your honor, obviously, but he's also kind of telling us like he's going to whoop our ass. And so he kind of chewed us out civilly, and then he left, and then we were not popular that day at the show. And I remember thinking to myself, it's a no-win, because if you fight Wilford Brimley and you beat him up, you beat up everybody's favorite grandfather who's a diabetic.
Right.
But if you lose, you've also lost everybody's grandfather who's a diabetic. So it's like, it would be like fighting a girl, I guess. It was ridiculous.
Well, that's what you should have said, Steve. If I fight you, Wilford, it's going to be like fighting a girl. And I'm sure that everything would have been smoothed over. Right.
I wanted nothing to do with him. I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I wanted that. It was surreal, Todd. It was weird. It was. You don't picture a senior citizen coming up and picking a fight with you.
No, that's not. That could be a whole nother show. Well, as far as so you got Wilford Brimley. As far as some of the guests that you've got booking on other podcasts and things like that, is there anything that's maybe might be, like I said, with Larry, I didn't realize the guy was, an Ivy League school and industrial designer. Are there any other little tidbits of people that you found surprising out of people that, that you've worked with that maybe, people wouldn't realize? Anything similar?
I a couple weird things have happened. You know what? Yeah, actually, there's kind of a weird story I've never told anybody. It's just one of those weird coincidences.
Yeah.
One of the guests that I had booked on a show, I was actually in a movie with when I was a kid.
Which movie?
It was a horrible Disney movie called The Devil and Max Dumpling.
Yeah, right. Okay, right. Okay.
It was with Bill Cosby and Elliot Gould. There was an actor. He's still alive. He's in his 80s. His name is Sonny Sawyer. Excuse me. And Sonny was Cletus on the Dukes of Hazzard. And little did I know, I had no scenes with the guy, but little did I know, when I'm talking to him on the phone, I know him from the TV show, but I didn't really know much more. I didn't think about it. I don't know. I just didn't think about it. And little did I know, like, holy shit, I met this guy years ago, and I did. I met him at the rap party, and it brought back. So that was kind of weird. I don't know. There have been people that my friend Carl Gottlieb, who wrote Jaws, and
right,
right. He's interesting in many, many ways, but one of them is he's the only guy I've ever met who's worked with a Marx Brother and a Beatle. So I mean, that's quite the accomplishment right there. Now,
how did you meet him? The screenwriter of Jaws. What? Okay.
I reached out to him. I reached out to him and said, Jaws was literally my favorite movie growing up. And
mine too. It was the scariest movie. To this day, I'm a beach guy, and I still can't go out past my knees, all because of Jaws.
I had reached out to Carl, and we got on the phone together, and it was the shortest conversation, the most intimidating conversation I ever had with anybody, because the man has you haven't interviewed him yet, have you?
No, I wish I could. That'd be a good one.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, he's just done so much. He wrote the Flip Wilson Show. I remember he's also an actor, and he acted in MASH. And
the movie MASH, or
the Robert Altman movie MASH.
Okay, didn't realize that. All right.
Him and Larry Hankin were college roommates, and him and Larry started in a comedy group. Well, you probably talked about The Committee, which was his comedy group.
Right. Yeah, San Francisco.
Yes, and over the weekend we lost Howard Hessman, who was.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, Carl, it's just fascinating to hear all the stuff he did, and then so I'd reach out to him and I booked him on a show, and that was it. And then I think it was a very brief conversation, very brief, and set it up. Okay, great, thank you, and that was it. Okay. A few months later, he calls me. Get a call out of the blue, and it says, his name. I didn't even say it to my phone, but it says his name. I'm like, okay, it's weird. And he said, yeah. He said, hey, I need your help with something. He says, I'm getting inundated with messages on my personal Facebook page by people. And he says, I know you know technology stuff a little bit. He said, would you build me a Facebook page? I'll work with you on that. I said, sure. So I went over to his place in West Hollywood, and I built the quintessential Carl Gottlieb page, and he and I contributed to it, and we made it. And then our friendship developed, and I started booking him on things like this. And then started booking. He's not a big podcast guy. He'll do them on occasion, and then I started booking him at autograph shows and screenings, and we became really good friends. So it's cool. And then I had a friend named Jim Beller who lived in Rhode Island, and Jim introduced me to Joe Alves. Joe was a production designer on Jaws. Him and Greg Nicotero were the people who built the shark.
Was this just coincidence? That he was involved with Jaws too, or did you seek him out?
It was Jim Beller. Okay, so there's a man I know named Jim Beller who lives in Rhode Island, and Jim works at a very fancy hotel. but he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for like Jaws memorabilia, like pictures, posters, and all sorts of, yeah.
Okay.
And there was a show that I worked with where they would talk to people who had interesting hobbies like that. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to Jim. I said, Jim, would you like to go on? He said, no. He said, you should book Joe Alves on there. And I'm like, I don't know Joe Alves. He said, oh, here's his number. Give him a call. Mm-hmm. And I called Joe Alves, and I remember, I know he worked. I knew what he did on Jaws, and he directed Jaws 3. He built the surfer to the first one, did second AD on 2, and then on the third one he directed. But I also remember Joe's work on Close Encounters, Starman, Escape from New York. Like, he's a production designer, so he would build these huge sets as green.
Sure.
And he invited me over his house, and him and his wife. I had lunch with them, and he showed me like original sketch drawings he did, and it was like looking at religious artifacts. It was kind of cool. And yeah, I've had a good life. I don't know, Todd, thinking about it, it's been interesting,
Well, and you even mentioned it's kind of like a Forrest Gump life. You kind of run into things that happen, and which is kind of just by fluke or whatnot. But you also brought up an interesting subject that I've found myself, that a lot of times people say, how did you meet these people or whatnot? I mean, a lot of times, for example, there have been a lot of authors that I've enjoyed their books, and I will look them up and just say, hey, I enjoyed your book. And 80, if not 90% of the time, I'll get a nice reply, and we start, having corresponding. It's funny, but a lot of people that you would think are just really hands off, and I would never do that, they're just like people like us. I mean, they like a compliment. They like, and a lot of people, it's kind of like the girl you're afraid to ask out at school, but nobody's ever asked her out, And so, some of these people are very appreciative for you to reach out. I mean, so that's obviously something that you found.
I have, yeah. And I found that a lot of the older ones, you interviewed Bruce Valanche, didn't you?
No, I didn't. Not yet. No, I'm taking a note of all these I haven't interviewed.
Anyway, well, I found that the ones, the individuals who have been around the longest are the most humble and great and gracious with their time.
Right.
It's hit and miss. I run into some jerks. But they're not, I don't know. It's hit and miss. But yeah, you're right. With the social media age we live in now, if you want to meet someone, you could do it. I'll give you a really good example. I did this back in May, actually. Uh-huh. I had watched a documentary called The Price of Fame. And it was back when I was doing some stuff with some professional wrestlers and from the 80s, mm-hmm. and booking them on shows. There's only a handful of them. And there was a man, named Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. And he had a documentary, and it was about his life in wrestling and how it changed, and his marriage. It's a really good, he's a very Christian man, very into his faith. Anyway, I wanted to see about booking him on a show, literally. Now, he's not on Facebook. He's not, I couldn't, so I looked up who made the movie, mm-hmm. and IMDb, the production company, got a hold of them, sent an email to his PR guy, someone like me, basically. And 2 days later, my phone rings, and it's him. He called me. Like, oh, I see the name. I'm like, oh shit, he's calling me. And I get on the phone with him, talk to him, and I booked him on a couple interviews, and that was it. So really, it's just taking the risk to do that. I have access to some people that other people don't? Sure. But if you, we live in an age, Todd, with, as you know, with Facebook and Instagram and whatever the hell they have invented next. If you wanted to, you could look up some kid you went to grade school with, Oh,
I know. Yeah.
Ex-girlfriends are harder because they've remarried, and they got
right. So you've obviously tried this then.
Years ago. Yeah. When I first got on Facebook,
yeah,
I actually tried looking up old girlfriends for the sake of seeing how they look now. I know it sounds horrible, but it was like, okay, did I get them in their prime, or do they look better? But yeah, it's funny. But I know everybody has been on Facebook and has looked up like a distant cousin, or there's some beautiful stories. I found my sister on Facebook, who I haven't seen since my dad's funeral back in the 90s.
Your sister?
So,
your sister? what, you lost track with your sister, and you found her on social media?
Yeah. Well, my wife actually had looked her up online. There's a search thing, you pay for, where you can see, if they have their bankruptcies or criminals or what have you.
Yeah, sure. Right.
My sister's dyslexic really bad, but my wife had found her there, but she had a couple of different aliases and names and whatever. And that's another thing about Facebook and Instagram is, you could put your name as Todd Smith Jones and shit, I mean, but anyway,
right.
She had used a different name, but yeah, I found her and connected with her a few months ago. That's kind of cool.
No, it is. Yeah.
The greatest example I have of that is when I first started. I had a friend. I don't talk to him that much anymore, but his name is Larry Wilcox.
Yeah, he was. Okay. He was. He's an actor.
Yeah, he was John Baker on Chips, the TV show.
Right. The blonde hair guy.
Yeah, him and Estrada.
Eric, right.
Yeah, so Larry was in Vietnam about a decade prior to being an actor on TV, period. Eric Estrada and Larry Wilcox were well in their 30s, but they looked very youthful when they got Chips. Anyway, so they were like 35, 36 years old. They're playing dudes that are like 22. Mm-hmm. Larry was in the Marines, and he was in Vietnam, and his second day in country, a motor went off and he almost got killed. Well, I had gotten in touch with Larry. Larry was one of the first celebrities I ever booked on a show too, by the way. He was one of the very first. Mm-hmm. I had booked Larry on a show, and it was a guy in Kentucky I knew. Some of the show hosts are really interesting characters in themselves, but this guy was in Kentucky. And he was a lawyer that had been disbarred for some reason, and he decided to reinvent himself as a podcaster or talk show host extraordinaire. So I had booked Larry on this. This dude's show was like 2 hours long too. It was okay. And I booked Larry on this guy's show, and it was back when I would listen to every single interview I ever booked. Now I can't do it, but I would listen to every interview.
Okay.
Not enough hours a day now. But anyway, Larry was talking about being in Vietnam, almost dying, and then coming back with PTSD, and then getting into, the arts and how he got Chips and so on. Well, on Facebook, someone can message you that you're not connected with. So you could say, Todd, you got a message request from Steve. And you're like, I don't know.
Right.
Well, I got one from a guy who was in his 20s, who was a soldier, or just got out of the Army. And he said, I heard your name mentioned, and I'm listening to that interview right now. He said, are you the guy that put that together? I said, yeah. And he said, okay. He said, can you get a message to Larry for me? I said, I guess, sure. What's up? He says, well, I was in the Army. He types out this long thing. And he says, I came back, and my life fell apart. My girlfriend left and whatever. Just a really horrible letter. And he messaged me. And he said, I'm thinking about taking my life tonight. And I said, well, God, no, don't do that. And I said, here, let me give you my number. Give me a call. Guy calls me up, and he was in a hotel room, and he was talking about killing himself. And there's a high suicide rate with combat vets.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And anyway, I was texting Larry, and Larry's an older gentleman. He's in his late 70s. I texted him. I said, hey, when you're done with this interview, please call me right away, please. And he said, sure. He said, what's up? I said, dude, just when are you almost done? He said, well, we got like 8 minutes. I said, good. Call me right when you're done, like literally. So I'm talking to this guy, and I'm telling him, like, look, you don't want to die. Where are you at? And he was in Wisconsin. He wouldn't tell me where he was at. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, look, I'm not going to call the cops. I'm just, like, you got a gun there? I'm talking, like, what do you got? What's going on over there? Mm-hmm. And he's telling me, and then Larry calls. I said, hold on. And I merged Larry in. I said, Larry, this is so-and-so. And the guy was like, take it back. He's like, oh, holy shit, I'm on the phone with him. I said, yeah. And Larry basically, from one veteran to another, talked this guy down, and we got him to go to an emergency room, and he gave us his address of where he was, and we got him the help, and he's alive today. Wow. That little thing is when I realized how powerful what you guys do is. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Steve, we're just about out of time. We've got about 30 seconds left. Anyway, do you want people to get in touch with you, or is there a site that people can learn more about you, or anything you want to pitch here on Right Mind?
You'll find me. No, I have a Facebook page. It's the SJ Network, and I'm there. And then it's Steve Joyner, Joiner. I mean, I'm there.
Okay.
I'm very reachable.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I'm out there, but it's not about me. It's about you guys and what you do. So listen to The Right Mind with Todd. And
you're doing an excellent job. I tell you what, I mean, I've been blown away just over the last, few months that we've worked together. Every day it's a new adventure that, I get a call or a message from you saying, how would you like to talk to so-and-so? And I'm like, what? And that's always, it's always exciting. But, so I thank you for that. And my listeners and my viewers, they thank you as well, because they don't have to just listen to me, talk to a guy like, arranging a sock drawer. So sock drawer. Anyway, thank you so much, Steve. Any final words?
Just, let's get through this year good. I mean, we're in, these times are very tough right now, and really take care of each other, but mostly take care of yourself.
Right.
I take care of yourself, people, because if you don't, you're not going to be worth a damn to your wives, husbands, or whoever. Take care of yourself.
It all starts at home. You got to make, that's right. You can't take care of other people if you're not in good shape. I totally agree. Well, thank you very much, Steve. You've been a pleasure to talk with on the show. I mean, I talk with you quite often off the show, but thank you for joining me.
I've enjoyed this, so really, I really do.
We'll do it again. We'll be like, sidekicks or something like that. We'll start a new show. We'll call it Right Mind. There you go.
No. You don't need an epic band. You're doing fine by yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm Todd Schowalter, and you've been watching and listening to Right Mind. And remember, if you don't have a right mind, you don't have a mind at all. Till next time, bye-bye.
This has been the Right Mind Podcast with Todd Schowalter.